Hello, everyone. It's good to see you tonight. I hope you enjoyed that little bit of music. I posted about that song today on social media. Some of you might have seen that post. The song is an old Scottish song called Telegorum. And it's good to see everybody back tonight after missing you last week. Do you love this bonnet? It really is a silk taffeta bonnet, just as the ladies would have worn at that time. And it was a big hit when I wore it last week. It's a great bonnet. I had a wonderful time making it, and it looks fantastic. Philadelphia visiting Independence Hall. Oh, then you really ought to contact Mr. Kyle Jenks or at Madison Portrayer on Instagram and Facebook, Miss Snyder. If Mr. Jenks is free, I'm sure he would be happy to take you on a tour of Philadelphia. He is the gentleman who often plays. Let me fix this so you just see me. Just a second. He is the gentleman who often plays James Madison with me, and on last week's tour, he played Mr. James Ackerman, a loyalist. So for those of you who were on early enough to hear that little bit of music I was playing, that's a wonderful song written in 1776 in Scotland. It's called Telegorum, and it was apparently written at the request of a lady who was a Lady Montgomery, who was disgusted that her dinner guests could not enjoy the evening without dividing between Whigs and Tories and having political discussion. And she asked a gentleman present to please write a song to entertain them. And the song is about putting aside one's political differences in order to engage in civic society. And at one point, the song makes fun of both Whigs and Tories, or patriots and loyalists, and encourages people to come together to enjoy life, and that those who can put their differences aside to love each other, hopefully will have all of the best things ahead in life. And those who don't are fools and tools of our oppressors. So it is a really wonderful song, and you can check it out. I posted it on Facebook and Patreon today about the song, and I think I posted an excerpt on Instagram as well, as well as the instructions for where you can find it on YouTube. It is a wonderful Scottish reel, and personally, I would love to learn how to dance those old Scottish reels that were so popular in the countryside in America at that time. So I don't know, maybe we could get our little troupe to do some dancing for you in the future. So hi to everyone. It's great to see you again. And from Manassas, let's see, from Manassas, from Indiana, from Rhode Island, from Virginia, everyone is here. It's great to see you all. And of course, it is Happy Evacuation Day, as yesterday was Evacuation Day, November 25th. And November 25th was the most celebrated holiday in all of New York for about 80 years after the American Revolution, more popular even than Christmas, and later, eventually, we celebrated Thanksgiving. Hello, Roxanne from New Jersey. It's nice to see you again, or I should say Miss Wallace, since I'm Mrs. Q and being formal. It's good to see everyone. So let's talk a little bit about Evacuation Day. Now, some of you were on our Evacuation Day event last Saturday, and for those of you who were, thank you for coming. It was a success beyond our expectations. It went wonderfully well. I'm currently working on a video compilation of many of the photographs that will be out in the next day or two with a narration of what was going on at each stop on the tour. So for those of you who couldn't make it, you'll be able to enjoy that. I'll release that on Facebook and YouTube. I've also been posting pictures, and everyone on the tour was fabulous. For those of you who don't know, my sister, Mrs. Van R, was on the tour, played by my good friend Ruth Vasquez, and she accompanied me on the entire route of the tour, and both ladies looked fabulous, I must say. Joining us on the tour was Scott McScott as Alexander Hamilton, and then Kyle Jenks as Mr. James Ackerman. Then after Mr. Ackerman, Bev Tyler of Setauket came in to join us as Abraham Woodhull, Culper Sr., the spy. And from Connecticut, we had Mr. John Koopman playing General George Washington. And the ensemble just worked so great together that we are already planning other events that we'll do in the future, perhaps even one coming to Philadelphia. And those events will be live streamed for all of you who cannot make it in person. So we will live stream those events. But for those who came, thank you so much for making it a big event. Mr. Hamilton, as you always know, is a crowd favorite. And when Mr. Hamilton arrived and greeted the two ladies with a deep bow with his hat off, the crowd went wild, I must say, with everyone climbing over everyone else to get a photo of Mr. Hamilton bowing to the ladies. So it was a really great experience. Ms. McGann says her father would refer to Evacuation Day, and he was born in New York City in the early 1900s. That is great. Ms. Wallace just finished binging Turn, and so we'll be talking a little bit about Mr. Woodhull just a little bit tonight because he was on the tour. And the narration of the tour, we found that Mr. Woodhull had been spying on Mr. Ackerman, but by the end of the tour, everyone had made amends and looking forward to reconciliation in a future great country. And that's really what I'm going to talk about tonight as well. Evacuation Day, and at least in New York, the spirit of reconciliation after the war. So Evacuation Day was the day the British finally departed our town, November 25th, 1783, one of the very last places the British left America. Now, by 1783, some of the surrounding areas and other colonies had already pretty much gotten back to business and had begun rebuilding their towns and getting back to normal. But the English did not leave New York for a very long time. And in the months prior to the evacuation of New York, about 140,000 people traveled through New York City to leave on those British ships. The British offered refuge to loyalists from throughout the country who wanted to leave, but they all had to leave from New York on British ships. So there was a great deal of people moving around through the town during that time, and it created not only a sense of instability, created a high crime rate, and also a sense of really not knowing what was going to come next. Now, by September, people like me, Mrs. Q, had begun returning to the city. Those of us who had been notified by the English command, Sir Guy Carleton, that our homes were empty and we could return to them, began returning to our homes. And of course, we all found our homes in a state of utter disarray and damage. In my case, my home was occupied by British officers, so its condition wasn't as bad as some others. Only a few blocks away, Mr. James Duane, whose home was occupied by regular soldiers, said his entire home was destroyed and his garden completely torn up and unusable. In my case, I was lucky that officers lived in my home, so it wasn't that badly damaged, but my shop was completely destroyed as it was used as a storehouse for weaponry and such things as the Army needed during that time. Accompanying me back home was my sister from Albany, Mrs. Van R, with whom I'd been staying throughout the war. Mrs. Van R was so disturbed by what she saw in the state of my home that she immediately sent for furnishings, housewares, and 2 servants to come down to New York to help us clean up the home and get it back into condition. And Mr. Q hired a couple of other gentlemen to help working on restoring the shop. So in my case, things are not so terrible, but in the case of some others great losses. Now, in September of 1776, I'm sure you know, a great fire burned through the city and left a quarter of it unoccupied. Many people returned to find that their homes had been burned in the fire and utterly destroyed. So although we are immensely happy at our success, our defeat of the British, and the joy with which we were able to watch them depart this land forever, we hope, yesterday, there still is a great deal of concern about how we will go forward and how we will rebuild the town. Now, also returning to the city are many people who are looking for retribution against loyalists who stayed here. Now, let me explain that there are different types of loyalists now at the end of the war. There are those who served in royal regiments for the king, who have been exiled, who may not remain. There are those who gave material support to the king's troops, either by giving them financial support or by supplying those troops. Those people must also leave. There is no quarter for them here. So those loyalists are being banned from living here in the future. This is a part of the Treaty of Paris we signed with the king, as the king was concerned that there would be a great exodus of people out of America and into England, people poor who could not support themselves and could not be absorbed by the English economy. So people who remained in America, who were loyalists, perhaps they were lukewarm loyalists, or maybe they thought that the best way forward was to be a loyalist, but they did not serve or give material support, are allowed to stay. So here in New York, we are giving a spirit of reconciliation to loyalists who fit that description. And here in the city, we do have many people who were not truly loyalists in their heart, but really did believe that staying in the city during the occupation of the British troops would afford them the greatest safety while the war was being waged. And of course, they found out that they were probably not so well off here in the city, that it might have afforded them a better shall I say, a better existence to have left with the rest of us and found a place either in the Hudson Valley, New Jersey, or on Long Island, as they were treated very badly by the British soldiers who stayed here. On our tour, Kyle Jenks played Mr. James Ackerman, who is a fictitious gentleman, but he could very well have been real, who was a widower and decided to stay in the city as he was a New Yorker and he had no place to go and felt it would have been better for him to stay. He expressed that during his 7 years here, I'm sorry, I have a message here from Mr. Jensen wanting to know, how could you tell what level of loyalists these people were? Well, it wasn't always so clear. I mean, it was very clear anyone who put on a uniform and served obviously had to go. And people were watching their neighbors to see who was doing business with the English as well while they were here. So many of them would have been identified as having done business with the English and would be asked to leave. Now, speaking of retribution, of course, there were people who would have come forward and claimed that people were doing business with the English who hadn't been, but claimed such in order to get back at them from some perceived wrong or some real difference of opinion they might have had in the past. So we do have problems with that moving forward. Many people did that in 1776 and caused people to be stripped of their land. It only took one witness to say you had been providing material support to the British for you to be stripped of your land and your property. Many of those people are coming back as well. So you can see that those are differences that will have to be settled. Now, Mr. Ackerman is one of those gentlemen who all we have really is his word that he was only a loyalist by necessity, because of course none of us were here to see if that was true. But we have all taken Mr. Ackerman on his word, being led by Mr. Hamilton, who has put forth the spirit of reconciliation along with some of the other gentlemen in the town. And Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Ackerman had a conversation on the tour in front of everyone to kind of maybe kind of see where each of them stood on this issue, and at the end did reconcile that Mr. Ackerman was welcome to stay and that he and his property would be protected by some of the people with ill intentions who were entering the town. Mr. Hamilton also reminded everyone that he is indeed a new lawyer and his services are available to anyone who has entered into a legal dispute over their property. And I think in the future, you probably know that Mr. Hamilton is going to settle quite a lot of these cases. He will take these cases, and as he said, he will charge a very reasonable fee for doing so. So there will be many of these legal cases going forward as well. So we have all of this to straighten out as we move forward. But in the spirit of New York and wanting to resume commerce, one of the things we have asked ourselves is, do we want to banish people who have the very abilities we need to reestablish trade and to move forward and be a profitable, prosperous, and city of law and order? Of course, we have many people who have trade agreements and have acted as agents and have their connections. We are no longer under the boot of England and England's navigation acts. And we are excited to go forward now and create our own trade relationships anywhere we see an advantage in doing so. And we have many people in New York who can facilitate that cause. So our view is, if they are willing to take an oath of loyalty to New York and our new government, they ought to be allowed to stay unless they prove otherwise. Now, I'll tell you that in the future, not far from today, one of the gentlemen who was instrumental in separating from England, a gentleman named Isaac Sears, himself a ship captain and a trader, and a leader of the Sons of Liberty, is in the future going to be banished from New York because of incidents of retribution that he will engage in, and also he will exploit the soldiers and their land grants that they've received. He will be banished from America and will spend the rest of his life in China, where he will die in China. So not everybody is going to be able to stay. It is going to depend on people's behavior as we move forward. But the general idea in New York is that we must rebuild, and in order to rebuild, we must have commerce. Mr. Hamilton has revealed to all of us that he is already working with some gentlemen in this town, like Captain McDougall and Mr. Morris, to form a bank that will be able to have lending instruments and get the economy moving again, so that people who need loans will be able to do so and move forward. Many of us, as I mentioned, will have to rebuild. Many farms will have to rebuild, docks. Almost everything you can imagine will have to be rebuilt so that we can, again, achieve a level of prosperity for everyone. So Mr. Hamilton is leading the effort in that. And of course, Mr. Hamilton and a number of young lawyers leading the effort in reestablishing law and order. But for now, General Washington is the chief law enforcement officers, and his men are here in the streets enforcing the law, so that we ladies can return to walking around in safety, and we can all rest assured at night in our homes that we will not be robbed or harassed in any way. So for the time being, General Washington is filling that role. What else is happening? Well, we are all happy to be re-greeting our neighbors. Some of us have not seen each other for 7 years, so it's very nice to see everyone again. Some of us are making new friends and neighbors, and many of us are just walking around the town, happy to be here, but also shocked at the condition of the town. So I think it's going to take us all some time to readjust ourselves and to move forward and to get a new feeling for what our town is and will be, as we all, I think, know in our hearts that the New York we left in 1776 is a city that is gone, and that is up to us now to build a future city, that city is in our past and something new is coming for all of us. So there's that feeling of anticipation. And of course, some insecurity is, the rest of the state has an elected body, an assembly, but New York City does not yet have a common council. So we're going to have to elect men to lead us forward in all of this. So it's quite a lot to be done. But Mr. Q and I are happy to be here in our home. We're happy to have Mrs. Van R here with us and her two servants that she has brought, helping us get everything back together. And it is quite nice to walk around in the town and see everyone and to refamiliarize ourselves with it. We, of course, are also mourning the loss of our men who were lost in the war, or other family members who, we have lost for other reasons, through sickness, disease, or violence, or other things that have befallen our families in the last 7 years. Now, also very curious, is that James Rivington, the Loyalist printer, is still here. Well, he's right down the street from me. I think some of you know that he's just a short walk down the street from me. And not only is he here, but the general has mysteriously placed an officer on guard at his door to protect his business. And this is the source of quite a bit of gossip and speculation around the town as to why General Washington would be protecting that horrible Loyalist printer, Mr. James Rivington, who spread the worst propaganda imaginable throughout the time of the war. So we're all wondering how that is going to unfold and why the general is doing that. So I may have more for you about that as the weeks go on and why Mr. Rivington is being protected. Trinity Church, you may know, beautiful Trinity Church was completely burned in the fire. So Trinity Church is gone. St. Paul's did survive the fire due to gentlemen who started a bucket brigade, doused the roof in water, and kept the embers from igniting the roof. St. Paul's is still here. The North Dutch Church, can you believe it, was used as a stable and is almost destroyed inside. That will have to be rebuilt as well, as were many other churches who were not Church of England. John Street Methodist Church also used as a stable for horses. Those of you who watched Turn, so I'll pretend I'm in the future a moment here, but those of you who watched Turn, it is true that the British officers turned Major Benjamin Talmadge Father's Church into a stable during that time. So that part is true. And they also did use the gravestones to build a wall. So that part of the story is true and quite outrageous. Now, our friends in Setauket have also found themselves reconciling with their neighbors. As Mr. Woodhull told us yesterday when he visited, he said many of us were loyalists and many of us were rebels, and we must all now learn to live with each other again. So you can see a lot of this reconciliation going on, at least in New York. I don't know if we're going to be finding that elsewhere in the colonies, or I should say the states. So we'll see, how that works out going forward. But I can say that the spirit is alive in New York and northern New Jersey, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley, at least in some towns. Of course, we are going to find quite a bit of anger and desire for punishment on the people who lost things during the war. It was a war. People did lose their family members. They lost all of their wealth. They lost their savings. They lost their property. They lost everything. So moving forward is going to be very difficult for many people, but we must find the spirit within us to put the past aside and move forward so that we can build something even greater than what existed before. Remember, we no longer have England to battle, and it is important that we don't fall back into a time of battling each other as we were before we united against England. So it's important that we don't fall back upon arguing with each other. So Evacuation Day, a very important day about closing the door on the past and moving forward into the future. So do any of you have any questions or comments about it? Were any of you on the tour? And if so, tell me what you thought about it. We had a wonderful time, and our troupe will be doing more performances in the spring, and I think even one in Philadelphia that will take place during the writing of the Constitution. And we will have young Madison and Hamilton on that tour as well. So let me know what you think. And What else can I tell you? I don't want to give away too much about the tour because I'm making a video about the things that happened, and I don't want to reveal any of the surprises. Miss McDermott was on the tour. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming. I think everyone had a great time seeing the outfits. When I shared the pictures on social media, one of the comments I got from a friend of mine was that he didn't realize the clothes were so colorful, because he says in the future there's an idea that the past was so drab and uninteresting, and I can assure you the outfits were all colorful and historically accurate to the time. The ladies did wear these big colorful bonnets. Mrs. Van R had on a lovely colorful floral jacket. Did you see that beautiful light blue coat Mr. Hamilton was wearing? Mr. Ackerman in that lovely red damask coat. And of course, Mr. Woodhull dressed more demurely, as he is a farmer from Setauket. So the two New York City gentlemen and ladies being dressed very well. People did wear very colorful clothing. People were very interesting. And I assure you, the ladies, at least in New York, were not submissive. For those of you who might have been on the tour, I will reveal that at one point, Mrs. Q asked whether or not ladies would be able to own their property. And Mrs. Van R was shocked and rebuked Mrs. Q, her sister, for being so forward and outrageous in her thinking. At which time Mr. Hamilton calmed down the two sisters and explained that there is a unique ruling in New York that if a husband inherits property through the wife, he may not dispose of that property in any way without the written consent of his wife. And that consent must be given apart from him, in a room of other gentlemen. So that's to make sure the wife is not under duress from her husband and being forced to sign over her property in any way that would be harmful to her, and that New York is the only state that has that ruling. Of course, I agreed that that is good, but when will the ladies be able to own our own property? And that is a question put forth on the table that no one seemed to have an answer for me. Now, I wonder, do you ladies also think that's too radical a question for me to have asked? Because if you were there, you saw that my sister became very agitated and angry at me for proposing such an outrageous thing, assuring me that it is only proper for the gentlemen to be property owners. And if it wasn't for Mr. Hamilton, my goodness, I don't know what kind of argument we might have got into right in front of everyone. So thanks to Mr. Hamilton for being a gentleman and stepping between the two sisters before things became a little too heated for our guests. See, Mr. Jensen asked, how long did it take to evacuate all those people? It took, I think, 8 months. I think the evacuation started in the spring and lasted into November. So it was a very long process. And if General Washington was head of security, did that mean it was martial law? Yes, we moved from martial law under the British to a more kind martial law under General Washington until such time the Common Council and a constabulary was established. And as you might know, General Washington is going to leave in just a little over a week. So that is going to happen very quickly, so that when he leaves on December 4th, all of that will be in place for the town. So we're moving very quickly on these issues. Gentlemen like Hamilton and McDougall and Mr. Duane, Mr. Willett and Mr. Livingston's, and so many of our other gentlemen in the town who are very capable of handling these issues. We'll be moving forward with all of it. Of course, it's always the gentlemen, right? But I'll tell you, the ladies in the background are doing their bit as well. And of course, I have had many ladies stopping by the shop already asking when I will have stock. When will I have silk again? When will I have ribbons, lovely ribbons like the one I have here that matches my quilted fabric? When will I have fabric? When will I have hair powders, perfumes, pomades, all of the things that make ladies feel good, rouge, lipstick, all of these things, the ladies are looking for products again. So it is imperative that we all get products back into our shop. And I'd like to assure the ladies that what will be coming to my shop will be even better than what I had before, as now that I am no longer restricted in items coming here on British ships, I can reconnect with some of my father's contacts in Europe directly, and will bringing you some of the finest linens, brocades, jewelry, and items directly from Italy and Spain, things that will be so beautiful. All of the ladies will just look wonderful in the years coming forward. I will have so many things in my shop that I could not sell to you directly before. So I hope you ladies will be all stopping by to see what I have. Some more questions. Women are stable and mindful individuals who are capable property owners. Well, I completely agree with this. Someone please speak to Mrs. Van R. if you see her, and express to her these sentiments, as it seems my sister is quite averse to this idea and quite outraged by it. I mean, personally, I think that if anything happened to Mr. Van R, that Mrs. Van R would be fully capable of taking care of that massive estate they have near Albany. And as she already does manage it quite well. So I think in the case of death, that property would very well be hers. But does that mean I would have to kill Mr. Q in order to own my property? What an idea. Mr. Q is outraged. Did you see? Did you hear him? That I would have to kill Mr. Q or have someone kill him on my behalf in order to own my property. I think that is a little bit extreme, and I'll back off on that idea for the moment. So I am quite happy to have Mr. Q as owner of the property, as I am sure Mr. Q would never do anything that I did not agree to. Can you hear him laughing? Can you hear him laughing? I don't know if you can hear him. He's laughing at me over there. Those of you who came on the tour, I don't know if you knew who he was, but Mr. Q was on the tour, as he is on all of the tours. I think many of you have come to recognize him. So any more questions or comments, or do you have some events you would like our troupe to reenact for you? We've come to really enjoy presenting this old form of teaching, street theater, for you, and we will be resurrecting it next year with many performances. We find it a wonderful way to get out and teach all of you about the great history of our country, and you will be seeing many, many more of our performances going forward. And of course, as we do them, we will get better at them. Were the women educated at this time? It depended on the situation of your family. If you were a family where everyone had to work hard, morning till night, simply to, as you would say, make ends meet, no, there's simply no time for education. And probably the only reference materials in the home might be a Bible, some sermons from your local pastor, and maybe a couple of other small works of poetry. And those poems might be something like The Pilgrim's Progress or Paradise Lost, also things you might read in church. If you were a family that had some leisure time, yes, your children would be educated. There would be either the mother and father would handle the education, or if they had a bit more resources, a tutor would handle the education. In my case, we did have some extra time, as my father was a rather well-off merchant and trader, and my mother was a successful dressmaker. As a result, a tutor was hired for my sister and me. So we could not only read and write, but we were reasonably well educated too. So it all depended on the status of the family. It also depended on the beliefs of the family, as some families would educate only their sons, feeling that that was a worthwhile investment, but not their daughters, as the daughters are going to be wives and mothers and really have no need for this type of education. And the girls would be more schooled in running the home, the things necessary to run and keep a home within one's budget, which is a very important thing to know how to do. So I really don't want to slight that idea. So the girls educated in those things, those ladies are very valuable as well. So it really depended on how much leisure time the family had, how much wealth the family had, and the view of the parents on whether or not it was useful to educate the daughters. Now, you might know that many of the Scottish and Dutch families educated their daughters better than some of the other families did. And so we see some families, for instance, Mr. Hamilton's wife, the former Miss Schuyler, very well educated lady, as her mother, Miss Van Rensselaer, was before her. And this is a tradition of some of the Scottish and Dutch families in the Hudson Valley to educate their daughters. Now, those are also very wealthy families with lots of land and lots of servants and lots of time to educate their sons and their daughters. And I hope that Mr. Hamilton is going to follow in that tradition and educate, if he has daughters in the future, his own daughters. Now, some of you might know there is a gentleman in this town, a young lawyer, Mr. Aaron Burr. He and his wife, Mrs. Burr, have already announced that they're planning to educate their young daughter, who is but 1 year old now, in the traditions of a firstborn son. So we already have some progress being made to educate our daughters, and we'll see how that project works out. I, of course, am very much in favor of it. Being educated as a firstborn son would be quite a thing for a lady to achieve. And I do believe a lady can do it without losing her mind. Those crazy men who think that if we're educated, we'll lose our minds. Who do they think keeps all of the record books in this business? Me. My father taught me as a very young girl how to keep the receipt books, how to decide who to give credit to, and how much credit to extend to someone. When it was time to ask people to pay on their credit, he also taught me how to deal with agents and traders and ship captains, how to keep the cash book. I do all of these things. So certainly, last I looked, I was still a lady, a respectable lady at that. So I think the ladies are quite capable of running these things. Didn't Mrs. Adams say so? Or I don't know, it's 1783. Maybe Mrs. Adams hasn't said so yet. I do believe she either has or will say something to John about remembering the ladies who have run your farms, your businesses, and your law offices while you've been at your wars and your congresses. So I think Mrs. Adams believes this too, and is shown to be a very fitting lady herself. So I hope all of you had a very enjoyable Thanksgiving. Please remember Evacuation Day and what it means for America, and what I hope it will always mean for America, that it is time, as Thomas Paine urged us, to put all of our differences aside, to come together as a new nation, a nation made of many people under the law, and to go forward into goodwill and prosperity. So I wish all of you a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. And I hope to see you next week, where it will already be December. So my best to all of you. And if you don't subscribe to my YouTube channel, please do that so you can see my videos as they come out. And I will see you all again next week. In the meantime, I'll see you on various forms of social media. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been my pleasure as usual. Good night, everyone. Mr. and Mrs. McCabe, as always, a pleasure, and I wish you the finest of holiday seasons, and all of you as well.